The airwaves over the Kestrel Valley were screaming. Pinned down and bleeding out, the ground commander begged for close air support. "Any jet will do," Colonel Ricky Alvarez transmitted over the roaring static. But when a battered A-10 Warthog ripped through the canyon, the colonel's blood ran cold. He knew exactly who was flying it. The ambush had been executed with terrifying precision. Nestled deep within the jagged, unforgiving ridges of the Kestrel Mountains, the convoy of armored strikers never stood a chance. The initial explosion, a command-detonated improvised explosive device buried beneath the hard-packed dirt of the mountain pass, had instantly disabled the lead vehicle, trapping the rest of the column in a natural kill zone. Now the air was thick with the acrid scent of burning diesel, pulverized rock, and the coppery tang of fresh blood. Inside the command vehicle, Colonel Ricky Alvarez pressed his back against the vibrating steel hull. He was a man who had built his career on immaculate uniform creases, polished briefing slides, and a pristine combat record that looked exceptional on paper. He was a master of the Pentagon's political chessboard. But here, in the dirt and the deafening roar of heavy machine gun fire tearing through armor, his political maneuvering meant absolutely nothing. "We are taking effective fire from 3 elevated positions," shouted Master Sergeant Destry Freeman, the unit's Joint Terminal Attack Controller, JTAC. Freeman was hunched over his PRC-117 field radio, his face smeared with dust and grease, a headset clamped tightly over his ears. "They have us bracketed, Colonel. If we don't get air support in the next 5 minutes, they're going to overrun the perimeter." Alvarez swallowed hard, his throat dry. He risked a glance out of the shattered periscope block. Tracer rounds crisscrossed the twilight sky like angry, glowing hornets. His men were fighting back valiantly, but the sheer volume of enemy fire pouring down from the ridgelines was overwhelming. "Get me air!" Alvarez barked, his voice cracking slightly, betraying the panic clawing at his chest. "I don't care what asset is up there. Fast movers, drones, anything. Tell Overlord we need ordnance on those ridges right now." Freeman nodded frantically, his fingers flying across the radio dials. "Overlord, this is Spartan Actual. We are troops in contact, taking heavy casualties. Code Red, requesting immediate close air support. I say again, immediate CAS." The radio hissed with heavy static, punctuated by the sharp crack of rounds impacting the striker's hull. Finally, the AWACS controller's voice cut through the noise, calm and clinical. "Spartan Actual, this is Overlord. Be advised, all fast-moving assets are currently tasked or bingo fuel. Nearest available asset is 30 mics out." "30 minutes?" Alvarez yelled, grabbing the headset from Freeman's hand. "Overlord, this is Colonel Alvarez. We will be dead in 10. I need something in the sky right now. Any jet will do. I repeat, any jet will do." There was a long, agonizing pause. In the distance, the booming thud of incoming mortar fire echoed through the valley. Alvarez braced himself, squeezing his eyes shut as the ground shook beneath them. "Spartan Actual," Overlord finally responded, the controller's voice carrying a hint of hesitation. "I have a single asset rerouted from a reconnaissance patrol. It's an older airframe, currently flying solo due to a mechanical abort on its wingman. ETA is 3 minutes. Call sign is Hawg 1-1. Alvarez's breath hitched. Hawg, the designation for the A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog. It wasn't just the aircraft that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. It was the call sign. Hawg 1-1. 5 years ago, during a disastrous operation in a desolate urban combat zone, Alvarez had made a catastrophic tactical error that nearly wiped out a platoon. He had called in an airstrike on the wrong coordinates. Only the insubordinate, split-second decision of an A-10 pilot who ignored his direct, frantic orders and fired on the actual enemy position, had saved the platoon. That pilot had embarrassed him. She had proven him incompetent on an open radio net. To save his own skin and secure his promotion to colonel, Alvarez had falsified the after-action report. He dragged the pilot in front of a disciplinary board, labeling her a reckless cowboy, a liability to modern combat operations. He vividly remembered standing before the tribunal, his uniform pristine, stating clearly for the record, "The A-10 is an obsolete relic, and pilots who rely on instinct over protocol are a danger to our modern military." He had personally ensured she was stripped of her flight lead status, grounded, and transferred to a dead-end logistics base where she would never fly combat again. Or so he thought. Alvarez stared at the radio, his hands trembling. "Overlord, who is the pilot of that aircraft?" "Spartan Actual. Pilot is Captain Saffron Howard." The name hit Alvarez like a physical blow. Captain Saffron Wraith Howard. The woman whose career he had intentionally destroyed to pave over his own failures. "Colonel," Freeman asked, noticing the blood drain from his commander's face. "Colonel, we need to prep the target data. She needs a 9-line. Before Alvarez could respond, a new voice broke through the tactical net. It was sharp, cool, and unmistakably familiar. "Spartan Actual, this is Hawg 1-1. I have you on my scope. Looks like you've kicked a hornet's nest down there, Alvarez. Make your mark." Alvarez froze completely. The past had just violently collided with the present, and the one person he had wronged more than anyone else in the world was now the only thing standing between him and a shallow grave in the Kestrel Mountains. The silence inside the striker was deafening, despite the chaotic symphony of war raging just inches outside the armor plates. Alvarez was paralyzed, the radio handset hanging limply in his grip. The voice of Captain Saffron Howard echoed in his ears, a ghost resurrected from the ashes of the career he had burned to the ground. He imagined her up there in the cramped utilitarian cockpit of the A-10 Warthog, a titanium-armored bathtub flying low and slow through the darkening sky. He knew her reputation. She was relentless, unyielding, and possessed an almost supernatural connection with the ungainly aircraft she piloted. "Spartan Actual, Hawg 1-1. Do you copy? I am inbound, 2 minutes out. I need an infrared strobe or smoke on your position, or I'm flying blind into a shooting gallery." "Colonel!" Freeman shouted, snapping Alvarez out of his trance. The JTAC didn't have time for officer politics or sudden bouts of shell shock. When Alvarez didn't move, Freeman violently snatched the handset from the colonel's hand. "Hawg 1-1, this is Spartan JTAC," Freeman transmitted rapidly, his voice a steady stream of pure professionalism. "Command element is incapacitated. I am taking control of the net, popping red smoke on our position now. Enemy is dug into the northern ridgeline, approximately 200 meters from our perimeter. Heavy machine guns and RPGs." "Copy that, Spartan JTAC," Saffron's voice replied, all business. "I see the red smoke. Stand by for the show." Up in the darkening sky, Captain Saffron Howard pushed the dual throttles of her A-10 forward. The twin turbofan engines whined as the massive aircraft banked hard, diving toward the jagged teeth of the valley. Through her heads-up display, the battlefield looked like a chaotic scattering of heat signatures. She recognized the striker convoy clustered together like wounded beetles, surrounded by a terrifying arc of hostile muzzle flashes from the high ground. She also knew exactly who was in the command vehicle. When she heard Alvarez's frantic, panicked plea on the open frequency, a cold wave of vindication had washed over her. The man who had sat in a comfortable, air-conditioned briefing room and declared her obsolete was now begging for his life in the dirt. But Saffron was a professional. The grudge could wait. The men on the ground could not. "Flipping master arm on," Saffron whispered to herself, her thumb resting lightly on the weapon release button on the control stick. Inside the striker, Freeman peered through a crack in the armored glass. "Everyone get down. Keep your heads in the dirt. She's coming in." Alvarez remained frozen against the wall, his eyes wide. He knew what was coming. Every combat veteran knew the sound of an A-10 Warthog on a strafing run. It was a psychological weapon as much as a physical one. The valley suddenly erupted in a terrifying, unearthly sound. It started as a deep, resonant rumble, followed instantly by the loudest, tearing noise imaginable, like the sky itself was being ripped in half by a giant canvas sheet. Brrrt! Before the sound even reached the men on the ground, the northern ridgeline exploded. 30mm depleted uranium armor-piercing incendiary rounds, firing at a rate of 3,900 rounds per minute from the A-10's nose-mounted GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon, slammed into the enemy positions. The impact was devastating. Boulders the size of cars were vaporized into dust. The heavy machine gun emplacements that had been raining death upon the convoy simply ceased to exist, erased in a blinding flash of kinetic energy and fire. The Warthog roared directly overhead, flying barely 200 feet above the valley floor. The massive aircraft banked sharply, its grey camouflage blending with the twilight as it pulled up to circle back. "Direct hit!" Freeman screamed, pumping a fist in the air. "Hawg 1-1, that was a beauty. Secondary targets are shifting to the eastern tree line." "Copy, JTAC. Coming around for a second pass." Alvarez finally found his voice. The sheer awe of the destruction had shattered his paralysis, but it was quickly replaced by a desperate need to regain control of the narrative. If Saffron Howard saved this platoon, there would be inquiries. Reports would be filed. The High Command would look into why a disgraced pilot was flying the mission, and the threads of his old cover-up might begin to unravel. His careerist instincts overrode his tactical sense. "Belay that, Hawg 1-1, Alvarez suddenly yelled, ripping the headset back from Freeman. "This is Spartan Actual. You are ordered to abort the second pass and maintain high-altitude overwatch. Do not engage further without my direct authorization." Freeman stared at the colonel in absolute disbelief. "Sir, what the hell are you doing? They are regrouping in the trees. They'll flank us." "I am in command here, Sergeant," Alvarez snapped, sweat pouring down his face. "She is too low. If she takes a hit and goes down, we have to mount a rescue op we cannot afford." Up in the cockpit, Saffron heard the order. She looked down at her threat warning receiver. The enemy wasn't just regrouping, they were adapting. A new radar signature popped up on her screen. The mercenaries had wheeled out a ZSU-23-4 Shilka, a highly lethal, radar-guided anti-aircraft weapon system, hiding it beneath the eastern tree canopy. If she climbed to a high altitude, as Alvarez ordered, she would be out of range of the Shilka, but the men on the ground would be slaughtered within minutes. If she went in for the strafing run, she would have to fly directly into the teeth of the anti-air barrage. It was Fallujah all over again. Alvarez was prioritizing protocol and his own selfish agenda over the lives of his soldiers. "Spartan Actual, this is Hawg 1-1, Saffron transmitted, her voice ice-cold. "I have a painted hostile anti-air battery in the eastern tree line locking onto your convoy. If I don't neutralize it now, you're dead. Ignoring previous order, commencing attack run." "Captain Howard, I am giving you a direct, lawful order to stand down," Alvarez screamed into the mic, his face purple with rage and terror. "You are violating protocol." Saffron reached out and calmly flipped the switch on her radio panel, cutting off the encrypted channel. Silence filled her helmet, leaving only the steady hum of her engines and the rhythmic beep of her radar warning receiver, which was rapidly increasing in pitch. Beep, 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 beep. The Shilka had a hard lock on her. "Let's see what you've got," Saffron muttered, shoving the stick forward. The A-10 went into a steep dive, rocketing toward the eastern tree line. The sky beneath her suddenly lit up with thick lines of glowing green tracer fire. 23mm explosive rounds tearing through the air, seeking the titanium skin of her jet. Back in the Striker, Freeman watched the sky in horror. "She's flying right into it," Saffron jinked left, then right, throwing the heavy aircraft through violent evasive maneuvers that pushed the airframe to its absolute structural limits. The G-forces crushed her into her seat, draining the blood from her head, but she kept her eyes glued to the reticle. She squeezed the trigger. The nose of the Warthog shuddered violently as the Avenger cannon spun to life. "Brat!" A line of explosive dust and fire walked perfectly through the tree line, walking straight toward the Shilka. But the anti-air battery kept firing. A deafening bang rocked the A-10. Warning lights instantly illuminated across Saffron's entire instrument panel in a cascade of brilliant, terrifying red. The aircraft violently lurched to the right. A 23mm round had blown a jagged hole straight through her right wing, severing the primary hydraulic lines. "Mayday! Mayday!" Saffron grunted, fighting the control stick as it suddenly went stiff, the aircraft trying to roll over into a death spiral. On the ground, Alvarez saw the flash of the hit. He saw the Warthog trail a thick plume of black smoke as it plummeted toward the mountain ridge. A twisted, dark sense of relief washed over the colonel. The Ghost was finally dead. Protocol had proven right, but as Alvarez watched, waiting for the inevitable explosion of the jet hitting the mountain, the Warthog didn't crash. Against all laws of aerodynamics, the smoking, battered aircraft violently leveled out just feet above the tree canopy. Inside the cockpit, Saffron had slammed the flight control switch into manual reversion, a terrifying brute force mechanical backup system unique to the A-10 that relied on cables and pulleys rather than hydraulics. It required sheer physical strength to fly. Gritting her teeth, her muscles burning as she hauled back on the heavy stick, Saffron banked the crippled, smoking Warthog around. She was bleeding altitude. Her right engine was sputtering, and her control surfaces were barely responding. She reached over and flicked the radio back on. "Spartan Actual," Saffron's voice crackled, breathless and strained, yet dripping with absolute defiance. "I missed a spot. Coming around for pass number 3. The sky above the Kestrel Valley was a bruised canvas of deep purple and charcoal smoke, illuminated only by the frantic, erratic flashes of tracer fire. Inside the shattered command striker, the silence following Saffron Howard radio transmission was suffocating. Colonel Ricky Alvarez stared at the radio panel, his jaw slack. He had just watched an aircraft take a direct hit from a 23mm explosive shell, a hit that would have sheared the wing off an F-16 or sent a modern stealth fighter tumbling into the dirt in a million flaming pieces. The A-10 Warthog, however, was not a modern sports car of the sky. It was a flying tank, designed around a titanium bathtub and built to absorb catastrophic punishment. "She's still up," Master Sergeant Destry Freeman whispered, a fierce grin cutting through the dirt on his face. "Colonel, she's manually flying that brick. The hydraulics are gone." "That's impossible," Alvarez stammered, backing away from the viewport. "She's insubordinate. She's going to get herself killed, and she'll take us down with her." Up in the battered cockpit of Hawk 11, Captain Saffron Howard was fighting the hardest physical battle of her life. With the primary and backup hydraulic systems completely bled out from the shrapnel wound in her right wing, the flight controls were locked into manual reversion. She was no longer flying the aircraft with the aid of computers or fluid pressure. She was using direct mechanical steel cables connected to the elevators and ailerons. The control stick felt as though it had been set in concrete. Every minor adjustment required her to brace her boots against the rudder pedals and haul back on the stick with her entire upper body strength. Her muscles screamed, lactic acid burning through her shoulders and forearms. Through the cracked canopy, she spotted the lingering thermal blooms of the enemy positions in the eastern tree line. The mercenaries down there thought they had killed her. They were already repositioning, confident the sky was clear, moving their heavy weapons to flank the pinned-down American convoy. Not today, Saffron thought. Her teeth ground together so hard her jaw ached. She slammed the throttle of her left engine to the firewall to compensate for the sputtering, smoking right engine. The unequal thrust made the aircraft yaw violently, but she fought the rudder, forcing the Warthog's nose to track towards the target. "Spartan JTAC, Hawk 1-1, Saffron grunted into the mask, the exertion clear in her ragged breathing. "I have no targeting computer, no HUD. Doing this the old-fashioned way. Keep your heads down, danger close." Freeman didn't even ask Alvarez for permission. "Copy, Hawk 1-1, cleared hot. Give 'em hell, Wraith." Saffron heard the old call sign and felt a surge of adrenaline cut through her exhaustion. She wasn't just a disgraced logistics officer anymore. She was exactly where she was born to be. She lined up the nose of the smoking A-10 with the dense cluster of thermal signatures. She had roughly 2 seconds to make the shot before she would overfly the target and crash into the rising ridgeline. Hauling the heavy stick back to keep the nose from dropping, she clamped her finger down on the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger roared one final time. Because the aircraft was flying on manual cables, the violent recoil of the massive cannon, which produced more thrust than one of her engines, shook the airframe with apocalyptic force. The dashboard rattled, warning lights flickered, and the entire jet threatened to stall. Brrrr! A relentless stream of depleted uranium slammed into the tree line. The remaining enemy ammunition cache was struck directly. A colossal secondary explosion erupted, sending a shockwave of displaced air and fire rolling across the valley floor. The concussive force washed over the Stryker convoy, rattling the heavy armor plates and shattering the remaining periscope glass. Inside the Warthog, the shockwave caught Saffron's crippled right wing. Crack! A sickening metallic groan echoed through the fuselage. The right engine, already severely damaged, ingested a cloud of debris from the explosion. The turbine blades snapped. A massive fireball erupted from the nacelle, lighting up the twilight sky. "Warning! Engine fire right! Warning! Engine fire right!" The automated voice in her headset was maddeningly calm. I know," Saffron yelled, her left hand flying across the console. She ripped back the right throttle, cut the fuel flow, and slammed the T-handle to deploy the Halon fire extinguisher into the burning engine pod. The flames choked out, leaving a thick trail of white smoke in her wake. But the drag was immense. She had just barely cleared the ridgeline, scraping the tops of the pine trees. She was now flying on one engine, no hydraulics, and half a wing, bleeding altitude with every passing second. Back in the valley, a profound, eerie silence settled over the battlefield. The deafening roar of machine gun fire had vanished. The tree line was a burning, cratered ruin. The ambush had been completely and utterly broken. Freeman peered cautiously over the rim of the Stryker's hatch. "Clear! The ridgeline is clear! They're retreating!" A ragged cheer erupted from the surviving soldiers in the convoy. Men who had been preparing for their final moments were now weeping, clapping each other on the back and tending to the wounded without the immediate threat of incoming fire. Alvarez, however, did not cheer. He stood trembling in the center of the command vehicle, his uniform soaked in sweat. He had survived. The convoy was saved. But as he looked at Freeman, who was furiously working the radio to track the crippled A-10, Alvarez realized that his nightmare was only just beginning. 30 minutes later, the distinct, heavy thumping of UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters filled the valley. 2 AH-64 Apaches circled overhead, their sensor turrets scanning the dark ridges, but there was nothing left to shoot. Captain Howard had sterilized the sector. Medical teams swarmed the disabled strikers, loading the wounded onto the medevac birds. The air smelled of burnt aviation fuel, charred wood, and the ozone tang of high explosives. Colonel Alvarez stood near the ramp of his command vehicle, a fresh, clean combat helmet firmly strapped to his head. He was already rehearsing his after-action report. He would commend the bravery of his men. He would emphasize his steadfast leadership under fire. And he would carefully, meticulously document the reckless, insubordinate actions of the close air support pilot who had unnecessarily endangered the mission by ignoring a direct order. He watched Freeman unhook his tactical gear, tossing his dusty helmet onto the hood of a Humvee. Alvarez approached the JTAC, his expression hardening into a mask of authoritative steel. "Master Sergeant," Alvarez said, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial octave. Freeman turned, his eyes flat and completely devoid of the usual respect reserved for a superior officer. "Sir, excellent work keeping the men focused today, Destry," Alvarez began, attempting a reassuring smile. "I'll be submitting your name for a Silver Star. Your coordination under pressure saved lives." "The Warthog saved our lives, Colonel," Freeman corrected, his voice like grinding stones. Alvarez waved his hand dismissively. "The pilot provided support, yes, but her refusal to follow the command hierarchy is a severe issue. She flew dangerously low against my direct orders. I need you to secure the local radio logs from the striker. We will need to scrub the localized tactical chatter before handing it over to Brigade. It was chaotic. We don't need Brigade getting confused by out-of-context audio. It was the same play. The exact same tactical maneuvering Alvarez had used 5 years ago in Fallujah to bury Saffron Howard." Freeman stared at the colonel for a long, agonizing moment. The younger man reached into his tactical vest and pulled out a small, ruggedized hard drive. He held it up in the moonlight. "Is this what you're looking for, sir?" Freeman asked. Alvarez reached for it, relief flooding his chest. "Yes. Good initiative, Sergeant. Hand it over." Freeman didn't move his hand. "You misunderstood me, Colonel. This is the backup drive. The primary data, including your direct order to abort the strike while we were actively being targeted by a Shilka, was on a continuous burst transmission loop to the AWACS data link." Alvarez froze, his hand hovering in mid-air. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. You sent the unencrypted command logs to Overlord." "Standard operating procedure for troops in contact, sir," Freeman said, his tone dripping with mock innocence. "I wouldn't want to violate protocol." "You have no idea what you've done," Alvarez hissed, his facade cracking. "She was a liability. She was out of control." "She was a ghost who came back to do your job for you," Freeman snapped, taking a step forward, completely abandoning military decorum. "And she did it flying a dead hunk of metal." Just then, the radio on Freeman's chest rig crackled to life. "Spartan JTAC, this is Overlord." Freeman pressed the transmit button, not taking his eyes off the terrified colonel. "Go ahead, Overlord. Spartan JTAC is listening. Be advised, Hawk 1-1 has successfully executed a belly landing at Forward Operating Base Delta. Aircraft is a total loss, but fire crews have extracted the pilot. Captain Howard is alive and currently in medical bay with 2 broken arms and severe fatigue. She requested I pass along a message to Spartan Actual. Alvarez stepped back, his back hitting the cold steel of the striker. "Send the message, Overlord," Freeman said, a faint smile touching his lips. Message reads, "Tell the Colonel he's welcome. Oh, and any jet will do. But a Warthog does it better." Freeman released the transmit button. The silence between the 2 men was absolute. Within 48 hours, the truth of the Kestrel Valley ambush reached the highest levels of the Pentagon. The raw audio recordings of Alvarez panicking, prioritizing his own career optics over the lives of his pinned-down men, could not be erased or buried. When the inquiry board convened, they didn't just look at the Kestrel Valley incident. Prompted by the glaring discrepancies in Alvarez's command decisions, an ambitious Inspector General reopened the Fallujah files. The doctored after-action reports were exposed. The testimonies of the men Alvarez had silenced were finally heard. Colonel Ricky Alvarez was stripped of his command, court-martialed for dereliction of duty, and quietly discharged from the military he had spent his life manipulating. He left the courtroom not as a decorated tactician, but as a disgraced bureaucrat who had been outmaneuvered by a pilot he thought he had destroyed. As for Captain Saffron Howard, she spent 3 months in physical therapy, her arms healing from the violent trauma of manually flying a 20-ton piece of dying machinery through the mountains. When the cast came off her right arm, a general officer stood by her hospital bed, offering her a pristine set of Major's oak leaves and a return to active flight status. She accepted the promotion, but she had only one demand. She wouldn't fly a desk, and she certainly wouldn't fly a sleek, modern stealth fighter. She belonged in the dirt, she belonged in the trenches. And as long as there were soldiers trapped on the ground begging for their lives, the ghost of the Warthog would always answer the call. Did the sheer resilience of the A-10 Warthog and Captain Howard's unyielding courage leave you breathless? This incredible story of survival, betrayal, and redemption proves that true heroes prioritize lives over protocol. If you were captivated by this intense airborne drama, hit that like button and share this video with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, real-life combat stories and tactical deep dives. What would you do in the Colonel's shoes? Comment below.